Welcome. My name is Misia Landau, and we have here with us Steve Hassan. Steve is a licensed mental health counselor. For the last 25 years, he has been engaged in helping people leave destructive mind control cults. He has been also very active in educating the public about the dangers of mind control, which are extremely widespread. He has written 2 books on the subject. The first was a book called Combating Cult Mind Control, which was a best-selling book, and his most recent is Releasing the Bonds, Empowering People to Think for Themselves by Freedom of Mind Press. Would you like to hold it up?
Oh, I'd love to. Thank you.
He has also established a resource center for the public called the Resource Center for Freedom of Mind. No, the Freedom of Mind Resource Center.
That's right.
And you can visit that at his website at freedomofmind.com. Steve has an extremely unique and valuable perspective on the events of September 11th and their aftermath, and that's really what we're here to discuss today. But to start off with, Steve, this is not the first encounter with terrorism for you, is it?
No, it isn't, actually. I've been working in the field for 25 years, as you mentioned, and I've worked with a number of different groups that have engaged in illegal, unethical conduct. The 2 major cults reported in the media involved with terrorism was the Rajneesh cult that put salmonella poisoning in the salad bars out in Oregon in the 80s, and the Om Shinrikyo cult in Japan. In fact, 60 Minutes flew me to Tokyo to be their expert for a segment that we did on Om Shinrikyo, and I later counseled some people involved with Om Shinrikyo.
Now, actually, many members of the public, and certainly plenty of journalists, have commented that the only previous episodes of bioterrorism were actually conducted by cults.
Right.
So how do you, when you actually observed the events of September 11th, it was pretty obvious to you that this was a terrorist act, first of all.
Yes.
When did it occur to you that the terrorists who perpetrated these acts might themselves actually be cult members to some extent, actually might be under the control of might have been subject to mind control?
Actually, for many years. You have to understand, I got interested in the subject because of my own cult involvement. I was recruited in 1974 into a front group of the Moonies and dropped out of school, quit my job, donated my bank account, believed Moon was the Messiah, that Armageddon was at hand, that World War III was going to take place back in 1977, and I literally was trained and conditioned to kill on command or die on command. And of course, over the years, as I've worked with other people in fanatical cults, I frequently thought about suicide bombers being conditioned and trained in the training camps to be programmed to kill themselves and kill others. And I should just say that for me, the characteristics of a destructive cult is a pyramid-structured authoritarian group that has a person or group at the top that has total power and that uses deception and mind control to keep people dependent and obedient. And what I mean by mind control is basically 4 overlapping areas: control of behavior, control of information, control of thoughts and emotions, which all combine to remake someone's identity into a cult identity, and that identity is dependent on the group. So especially after September 11th, when I was reading the media and listening to reports of family members who were shocked that their loved ones were terrorists and who had perpetrated this horrible crime, they described a radicalization of their loved one, a radical personality change. For them, they just described it as becoming, radically Islamic, but they were totally unaware of the kinds of practices that go on in these training camps in Afghanistan and other terrorist camps that involve everything from sleep deprivation, dietary manipulation, complete information control. I've heard tales of people having to watch hour upon hour of videotapes that were highlighting the death of Muslims, highlighting Americans killing Muslims or Jews killing Palestinians and other Muslims in order to inculcate a tremendous hatred of America as well as Jews. And also, as well, I've heard reports, documented reports of them needing to, the suicide bombers that is, needing to lie in open coffins in the ground for hours at a time, being told and programmed literally that they had now died, and that in coming out of the coffin, they were really dead men, but they were just needing to do one more act for Allah in order to complete their mission. So
you had a pretty unique perspective, because in some sense, whereas everybody else in the country probably was viewing these men with the 19 hijackers with enormous anger and perceiving them as actually evil, you were in some sense seeing them as victims. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a little bit about what goes into recruitment of a cult member, and then possibly what might have gone into the recruitment of these 19 and the many other terrorists that are at large?
Well, first of all, I just want to make a distinction between some of the terrorist bombers in the Middle East, Palestinian suicide bombers that really have grown up in a culture of violence and grow up with a hatred of Israel and Jews. And for them, there's not a lot of conditioning that goes into making them into a terrorist bomber. In fact, I hear that it often entails 24 to 48 hours, and the person's never left alone. However, people involved with Al-Qaeda and some of the other terrorist organizations were coming from backgrounds of middle class, upper middle class, wealthy, educated, highly functional family structures and such. And essentially what happens when people are recruited by destructive cults is it's really a step-by-step process. People don't come out typically and say, "Hi there, would you blow up men, women, and children?" It's more a give and take reaction and an interaction where the recruiter tries to find out as much as possible about the person's background, find out about their hopes, their dreams, their fears, try to find what buttons to push, basically, that will make them take the next step. And the next step is further involvement, and then, only then, go to an isolated indoctrination place for months.
And you noticed firsthand because of your own recruitment into the Moonies.
Exactly.
Can you tell us a little bit about that recruitment?
In my case, and I should say that people who get involved with destructive cults, I've never met anyone who knowingly joined a destructive cult. Mm-hmm. They always thought they were joining some Bible study or some self-improvement program, or they were going to sell some products and make $1 million. They never were told up front what it was. In my case, I had just broken up with a girlfriend, 3 attractive women, and invited me over for dinner. And I even asked, "Are you part of a religious group?" And they looked me straight in the eye and said, "Oh, no, not at all," mm-hmm. which was the big lie. And what the public needs to understand is that people are being seduced, they're being manipulated, they're being tricked, and they're being programmed to become destructive cult members. A very small percentage of those go on to be given missions to do terrorism, and because the leadership of the group want to select the ones that are most dependent, most obedient, most hypnotizable, and I should also say they're put in buddy systems, mm-hmm. in cells, so that they're only told a portion of the operation, and they're also told that they need to be prepared to kill their own comrades if the order comes down from above. And so they're always being monitored, and they're always afraid that they're going to be reported and they're going to be killed. So as there is a qualitative difference between someone in the Moonies or Scientology, Soka Gakkai, or Jehovah's Witnesses, where people are given irrational fears that if they leave the group, terrible things are going to happen to them. They're going to be hit by a car or get cancer, or they're going to lose their salvation in heaven. With people in terrorist cults, they literally have a real fear that they're going to be killed and that their family is going to be killed if they betray the secrets or if they don't complete their mission. So it's another level of magnitude of destructive mind control.
Right. You hear often that the subjects, as you said, were from good middle-class families. In fact, upper middle-class families, highly educated. They were often recruited while they were students.
Right.
You also mentioned in your own case, you were also a student, that
Right.
you had been in a particularly vulnerable period in your life.
Right.
You had just broken up with your girlfriend. Is that true typically, that people tend to be at a vulnerable spot?
Yes.
Is it also true that some people may be more vulnerable than others, that there might be a personality type? And then finally, I'd like you to sort of pull that together and address the issue of what you know of the 19 hijackers and the other terrorists. Might they have been in a more vulnerable spot?
Basically, if someone's going through a major stress or transition in their life, they're typically more vulnerable to a mind control scenario. So someone breaking up in a relationship or divorce, someone changing jobs or losing their job, someone who's moving to a new city, state, or country, someone who's in the process of changing schools or changing majors or graduating. Something that sets them a little off balance will make them more susceptible. But as far as personality types go, I think it really defies all of my research. It defies the stereotype that it's just weak, stupid people from bad families. In fact, the profile is the opposite, that very intelligent, educated, idealistic people who might have been in a vulnerable moment in their life get recruited into this. And indeed, in getting the information that I've had access to publicly, it seems that Al-Qaeda really fits the model of a destructive mind control cult. And I think that we really do a disservice to the situation that we're faced with, this horrible crisis, to just label them as evil people or misguided people. I think we need to understand that this black and white, us versus them, good versus evil mindset that their new cult identity has been indoctrinated with. And we need to, I think, employ techniques such as the ones that I use to help people when families call me and hire me for my help to rescue their loved ones. I think the government, and in particular in the work that they have been doing with captured terrorists, they need to start employing that specialized knowledge and techniques to undo some of the programming. So, for example, when you're in a mind control cult, you're taught never to think negative thoughts about the leader, the doctrine, or the group, and you're literally taught techniques to shut down critical thinking. One of the most common ones is called thought-stopping techniques. It might be chanting, it might be meditating, it might be speaking in tongues. Different cults do different things, but I know that, for example, when my father tried to stimulate my critical thinking when I was in the Moonies, and he had seen an article about how Moon had an M16 gun factory in South Korea, and my father thought, now this will wake Steve up that Moon is not a religious man. And he said, Steve, he has an M16 gun factory. What he didn't realize was that it immediately started me chanting in my mind, crush Satan, glory to heaven, peace on earth, glory to heaven, peace on earth. And it actually got me deeper in the group, because now I perceived my father to be persecuting God by this attack, and made me do this technique on myself. And so the way to sidestep that indoctrination component is to first have a dialogue about what another group that does mind control. Because when you're in a cult, you don't think it's a cult. You think other groups are mind control cults, but not yours. And you're taught to do this thought-stopping technique regarding your group, but not others. So if my father had talked to me about Heaven's Gate, if I had been in the cult then, or People's Temple, or Charlie Manson, or the Order of Solar Temple, or Shinrikyo, and talked about behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control, he would have been giving me the information and the tools to understand what is mind control, and then he would be in a position to ask me how my group is different, how my group doesn't control behavior, how my group doesn't control information.
Right. I want to get you to actually address that question quite specifically. What would you do, actually, if you had, for example, a jailed terrorist or somebody from a sleeper cell here, or a member of Al-Qaeda? But my first question is, again, because there's a lot of misconception about the whole issue, can you distinguish brainwashing versus mind control, giving us a better sense of what you mean?
Yeah, basically the term brainwashing was coined during the Korean War, and it referred to a process in basically where a POW was held against their will and the POW was very coercively indoctrinated to have a different point of view. And so for someone who's being brainwashed when they're with the agent of influence, the initial experience is these are the enemy and they're trying to break me down. And so there's a natural defense system that goes up. And there may be compliance to signing false confession, but it's not a real internalization of identity as it is with mind control. Because with mind control, it's much more subtle. In the beginning, the person thinks the agent of influence is a friend or benevolent or a teacher or a mentor, volunteers freely information, very personal information about themselves. And so in the mind control process, as it's being done, there's much more ownership that the person assumes. And there's this illusion of control, or this illusion of choice, that someone is joining the group as opposed to being manipulated and indoctrinated against the person's will. So there's this illusion that the person's participating. And as far as what I would be doing if I had my way, I would be finding the family members of these jailed terrorists. I'd be sitting down with them and doing a preparation meeting, as I typically do with any client, for several days, bringing former members of the group, teaching them all about mind control, teaching them strategies such as sidestepping the thought stopping. I have a whole chapter in Releasing the Bonds on how to undo phobias, and it really empowering them to then meet with their loved one and begin the process of getting that person to meet with me and former members, as opposed to the old 70s model of the forcible deprogramming, you know, that people in the public still may remember, where someone's abducted on the street corner and they're thrown into a van and a deprogrammer yells at them, which was done in the 70s. My approach is completely non-coercive, is very done with respect and love and compassion, and with a focus on the truth. My experience is that most cult members are idealistic, and they really think they're following God, and they really think they're following the truth. And when they're given the facts and they're given the explanation of what the mind control process is and what they experience, they can start to re-access their real self. And then we can deal with the cult self. And at that point, we would get all kinds of information, intelligence information, that might expose other members as well as plans.
Right. Okay. How about for the sleepers in this country? How could you indirectly get to them?
That's a big problem, and access is always one of the big problems. And the only thing that I can imagine is to try to get the public educated about mind control and cults. And that if the entire public knows, particularly the Arab media, understands cults, and if we can get enough former members coming forward, particularly former members of terrorist groups, who are willing to come forward and talk about what really goes on there, and not just the 2-second sound bites of, you know, kill the Jews or kill America, but really what's going on inside, and expose the hypocrisies, bring Islamic scholars and clerics forward talking about the Quran, how it's a great sin to commit suicide, or how there's no interpretation of jihad that involves killing civilians. So what I see is needing to happen to reach the sleeper cells is just a vast worldwide educational effort to explain destructive mind control. I might point out one of the big problems with doing that is that there are many countries who have dictators that exercise behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control in order to maintain power. They don't have a free press. They jail or kill their dissidents, and they will not want the public to know about mind control techniques and such. So there might be censorship done within certain governments. However, the internet exists, and for me the internet is a great tool to educate the world. And to that extent, I can tell you that I've been on the web since 1995, and I have people coming to my site from literally all over the world, asking me about all different types of groups and trying to learn about mind control. And I've gone to put on a number of chapters from the new book just to get the information to the public, because I think we need a vast grassroots effort that doing more violence is not going to solve this problem, that we really need to realize that we're on one spaceship Earth together, and that our survival depends on mutual cooperation and sharing.
Good. I have a final question because we need to be wrapping up, but and it's relevant to your mention of your website as a resource, because in some sense the public is at greater danger now themselves to being recruited into a cult. Can you tell me about that?
Oh, thanks for bringing that up. Well, you know, when people are in stress or transition, such as economic decline, as we're experiencing, job loss, fear of terrorist attacks, destructive cults are out in force recruiting like crazy, saying, and some of the Bible cults are saying, this is the last days and this is your last chance to join God and have eternal life and whatever. I saw New York Times did a puff piece on Scientology, recruiting at ground zero, doing their recruitment techniques. So what I say to the public is be really vigilant of your friends, your family, your neighbors, and stay in touch with them and make sure they become good consumers before they go to any counselor or they take classes or study any Bible studies. Find out who the people really are and not necessarily the name they're using. And get to a library if you don't have access to a computer in your house. Do searches on the internet for information, because if a group is legitimate, it will stand up to scrutiny. And if it is a destructive cult, you will find some critical negative literature about it on the internet, or if not now, soon.
Right. And then for those, of course, who are in cults or are already in cults, well, especially for their families, you're available. I mean, your website is highly available. There's lots of resources. You do consultations, I understand.
Yes.
And
basically, I wrote the book so that it would give the information to the public so they'll understand my approach and my methods and such. And for a number of people who have long-term involvements or very intractable cases, they're probably going to need professional help. And yes, I'm a licensed mental health counselor and I do consultations. But this show, what I really wanted to focus on is just the fact that we are all victims, in my opinion, of a destructive cult of radical Islam. And it is not representative of real Islam. Having a name like Hassan, by the way, and growing up Jewish, I've experienced discrimination all my life, one way or the other, either people thinking that I'm an Arab or people finding out I'm a Jew. And what I don't want is for racism to grow or hatred to grow. What I want is a compassionate, respectful approach to people of all orientations. And really, if you have a terrorist living next door in a sleeper cell, the best thing you can do is befriend them and talk with them and be nice to them, because that's going to undo the programming that Americans are evil and horrible. If you treat them spitefully or in a racist manner, it will confirm the programming that Americans are bad and will help to push them forth to do more terrorism.
Or you're actually referring to people you suspect might be a terrorist.
Or suspect, exactly. Thank you for clarifying.
Well, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
And thanks for SCAT.